Hello, role-playing people! I've been saying it for a while now that Demon empowers players, so in this episode we're going to have a look at how it goes about achieving that. I know these kinds of things are usually subjective. Some people feel empowered and some not so much, and it might depend on the storyteller, might depend on the group, but in this case I feel like the writing and the mechanics themselves really back this idea up. Demon wants to be a game of infernal glory, not personal horror, not savage horror, not modern fantasy. Does it succeed? Let's have a look at a few really nice little things Demon does to empower the players. One of the very first things I will look at is, of course, the evocations, the active superpowers which set our protagonists apart from mortals and other supernaturals in the world of darkness. Alright, so what's great about them? Well, the first 3 dots of any lore are free of cost, and you don't need to spend any consumable to use them. As such, you can cast them pretty much at will without wasting any resources. Even better, to guarantee their success on the evocation roll in a way that cannot result in a botch, players can just spend a temporary point of faith before making the roll, thus ensuring they will score at least a marginal success. But wait, it gets better. The lower the difficulty threshold, the more chances players have at scoring more successes. That's where the apocalyptic forms and certain merits come in. When it comes to a character's primary lore, if the apocalyptic form is also assumed, either partially or fully, the difficulties of most rolls go down by 2. There are also merits that decrease difficulty of rolls, some of which can, again, be used when evoking lores. So marginal success is all but guaranteed if the player uses consumables wisely. But further still, Demon makes use of the Paragon background, which allows a character to re-roll a number of evocations in their primary lore equal to their rating in this background. That number of uses is replenished each chapter. So not only does the game allow for reduced difficulties and automatic successes, but it also allows a number of free re-rolls when the results are not to the player's liking, effectively making the player the master of their protagonist's lores, which makes it clear from my point of view that Demon the Fallen wants the players to have powerful characters who are very good at what they do. As is tradition in a lot of World of Darkness games, societies of supernaturals have their own rules. Mostly oppressive rules when dealing with mortals, whether we're talking about the dictum mortum, the litany, the traditions, and so on. Breaking these rules, depending on which society your character belongs to and the severity of their transgression, can result in their destruction. Well, Demon doesn't really have those rules. Instead, each tyrant is free to make their own, as long as they can also enforce them. Most of the societal norms of the courts of the fallen aren't set in stone, and they are not the same from one court to the next. The interaction with mortals isn't regulated by any kind of law, but by the player's own preference. It's almost like the game is saying, no approach is societally considered wrong. Should you be punished for your actions, it will not be by some fictional law, but by the consequences of your own choices and methods. Do whatever you want, but be wise about it. And I think this attitude is very fitting for a game of infernal glory, in which making a pact more often than not will have the character breaking the masquerade, so to say, by revealing their divine nature to mortals. While we are talking about societal rules and behaviors, the game also shows leniency when it comes to the acquisition of torment. Other titles in the World of Darkness line will have your protagonists degenerating pretty fast when transgressing against their virtues and beliefs. As such, there are almost no instances in which the player isn't mindful of the character's morality rating or sanity or whatever have you. Demon shows a remarkable tolerance towards the character's moral transgressions or sins. Every time your character does something wrong, they are in danger of receiving a temporary torment point unless the player succeeds on the appropriate virtue roll. Thing is, only when your character has accumulated 10 temporary points of torment do they gain a permanent point of torment. When the permanent rating reaches 10, the character becomes an irredeemable monster and is unplayable. But even these permanent points can be bought off for 10 XP apiece before the permanent rating reaches 10. Lovely. What this means is that, again, the protagonist will not degenerate so quickly that it catches the player off guard, but instead the player has a higher degree of control over character degeneration. And that just feels great. It feels like it's part of the narration and part of the story, not just a punishing consequence for not being good. The slower degeneration happens in-game, the more players can just go nuts, really getting into that mindset of being something which was never human until recently. That frightening alien morality, the unpredictability of it, and the way it carries the potential for destruction. The characters can slowly turn into living agents of the abyss just as well as they can find redemption and be humane or caring, and this attitude can safely fluctuate throughout the chronicle, which is something I love. I love playing impulsive, angry characters who make mistakes and get their hands very dirty, but they redeem themselves at a later time and find enough courage to actually show compassion, care, and love. Demon the Fallen makes these kinds of moments feel right at home, and in doing so, it puts a lot of options for roleplay and drama in the hands of the players. Speaking of options for roleplay, this is something I was talking to a friend about, and it's funny because what he sees as a sin, I praise as virtue. The flaws or weaknesses of each house of the Fallen are not quantified mechanically, and I think this is not the consequence of rushed production, but a very wise and calculated decision made to, again, empower the players. If flaws aren't quantified mechanically, this means they don't necessarily manifest the same way all the time. So each player can create a narrative tonal variation to how these flaws manifest and how their characters behave as a result. I think it's a wonderful thing to trust your players enough to give them descriptions or guidelines that aren't enforced mechanically and just let them play into that flaw in a way that resonates and brings out their character's personality. I've grown to really dislike those types of what I call resist compulsion roles that might force the character to behave in a certain way mechanically, but they don't guarantee that player's collaboration narratively, and it might just make them feel disempowered. I mean, do I really need a role to decide whether my fiend character is going to get curious about a certain mystery they're presented with to the detriment of the current investigation? Do I need a role to tell me that my Slayer character is a stubborn old goat and will not change their mind? Short answer, no. An unfavorable result on such roles means that regardless of what the player was planning, their character cannot get over the compulsions or flaws, which can derail time-sensitive plans and slow the game down overall, as the character needs to deal with their flaws first and foremost. And make no mistake, I enjoy having these kinds of things happen in other settings, like Vampire the Masquerade, but I don't think forcing the character into certain behavior as dictated by a role is something a game of Infernal Glory should do. So I just love the fact that the players are free to roleplay their house flaws in any way that was agreed upon with the group and the storyteller. You can go heavy on the flaws, you can go light on the flaws. The choice is yours. I love that. The next really cool thing Demon does that I believe empowers the players is that it allows for a wide range of character types and archetypes that don't go against the setting. The connection between the Fallen and Host doesn't rely on external justification. It is rather a very personal thing. The Fallen doesn't embrace a certain host because of their resources or because of orders coming from a superior of their sect, but just because, against all odds, a connection is made between the two. That mortal can be anyone at all. Certainly, most World of Darkness games allow for varied protagonist concepts, but Demon also goes as far as to remove potential linguistic barriers between characters who are from opposite sides of the globe. The Fallen don't need to speak a common mortal language to understand each other. The very first dot of the lore of humanity allows protagonists to understand and speak all human languages one scene at a time. And should that not work for one reason or another, the Fallen can always communicate with other Fallen by speaking the one tongue, the language of Celestials, or as some might call it, Enochian. So what this means is that the Chronicle can be set anywhere, and the protagonists can be from anywhere belonging to any human culture. It's not going to break the game at all or put anyone in difficulty. If anything, it's going to show interesting and diverse perspectives. And hey, who doesn't like being able to speak a super spooky secret language? But more than that, the fact that the Fallen and their thralls can communicate via invocation without needing any mundane tools means that discrete conversation is possible, but also the communication channel is always available. It can be opened at will through invocation. So now strategizing and synchronizing multiple elements has never been easier. To facilitate that kind of communication between player characters and to allow them a means of strategizing, even in the heat of the moment, is very nice and empowering. It allows for good teamwork. Speaking of which, having members of different houses working together in Demon the Fallen is super rewarding. Unlike the clans in Vampire the Masquerade, which have quite a few disciplines in common, the houses of the Fallen are very specialized in what they do. You will find 4 or more clans or bloodlines which have the discipline of obfuscate, for instance, but you probably won't find anyone but defilers masterfully wielding the lore of transfiguration. As such, if your character needs to alter their appearance, they will have to negotiate with those of the deep. This is only one example, but each house is relevant to the court and the society of the Fallen without exception, and each addresses certain needs that no other house can address, which keeps the interactions going, keeps the houses socializing, and the political game running smoothly. Every character creation option or build is and will remain valid and powerful in its own way throughout the Chronicle. Now, when these different houses work together, it's even better. You can achieve truly marvelous effects and very potent results. To give you a solid example, a devil can use Pillar of Faith evocation to enhance a malefactor's use of Lore of the Forge, which results in the creation of a permanently enhanced super weapon that the whole group of characters can use. So it's really nice. Next on my list of awesome things Demon does is the fact that no character is so weak that they can't hold their own, and each, regardless of house or visage, have means of destruction. See, it's fun to play a pacifist character when such is the player's choice, but it's not fun at all to play a character who is actually, mechanically, harmless. The Fallen took part in a huge celestial war. They are not harmless. That is why all of the apocalyptic forms have some kind of feature whether low torment or high torment, that allows the character to either deal aggravated damage, to make multiple attacks, or to poison a would-be opponent. That is why a lot of the lores that aren't necessarily associated with combat can still do a lot of damage, whether it's in the form of a psychic attack, a divine voice shattering the pillars of your mind, an illusory burst of light, or the telekinetic breaking of bones in someone's body. Though the characters can be benevolent, they are still capable of great destruction if the player so desires, and that is wonderful because it keeps your options open and doesn't box the characters into repeating the same types of interactions, like the healer who isn't good at anything but healing, or the social manipulator who resolves every conflict by talking it out, and so on. Demon lets you play it any way you want, because, and this is the last item on my list for now, a list which is neither exhaustive nor 100% complete, though I think it brings out some of the most interesting features of the game, aside from the awesome lore. So the last item is, the game allows a lot of freedoms and powerful mechanics, but having fun and telling a good story always comes down to player choice and motivation. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that, according to the rules, your Slayer character can do some very serious aggravated damage to all living beings over a fairly wide area by just using the High Torment second dot of the Lore of Death. If you build your character to do that, your Slayer can terminate the existence of every living thing within a certain range. No save, no resist roll. Now, you can use such a mechanic to tell an intense and horrifying story that makes your stomach churn and captivates everyone at the table, or you can do it to test out the superpowers and break the game for everyone by killing their characters for no good reason. See, power in itself has no meaning, but rather it is given meaning by the player's aspirations and motivation, the protagonist's interaction with other characters, and the chemistry between them. It is an undoubted fact that Demon was rushed, and it isn't a balanced game, but I would argue that it doesn't have to be, as long as there is genuine collaboration at the table. It is a functional game, and very much fun, if you don't actively go breaking the limits. Instead, focus on the story, give your character and their actions meaning, make it an enjoyable experience for everyone involved. Is the game itself responsible for our entertainment and for harmony at the table by setting limits and boundaries? Or is everyone in the group responsible for such matters, everyone involved in the process of playing the game? I think this is a very good question, a question to which I don't have a definitive answer. To conclude, I think despite its flaws, despite its mechanical fragility and lack of balance, Demon is a game that aims to empower the players, first and foremost, offering them a lot of genuine choice and variation when it comes to character creation, character portrayal, flaws, abilities, setting, locations, and also a lot of control over their interactions with the game world, whether it's done through roleplay or rules and mechanics, or both, of course. Personally, I really like games that offer more options for interaction, even if that makes the rules a bit ambiguous and unclear, instead of narrowing those options down in the name of balanced encounters, balanced abilities, and, restrictive, seemingly endless lists of rules. If giving the player more results in the game being a bit fragile in the rules department, I think it's important to remember that with great power comes great responsibility, and everything might be permitted, but it's not always useful or necessary. Thank you very much for listening. Take care, have fun, and don't forget to play.